They told you it was chemistry. That mysterious feeling when your heart races, your body tenses, and your mind cannot stop replaying one person's voice, smile, or presence. They told you it was natural, that being attracted to someone intensely, almost obsessively, is a beautiful sign of connection, of desire, of life itself. Society celebrates this intoxicating pull as the foundation of romance, the spark that ignites true love. But Carl Jung would look you in the eye and say something different. He would tell you it is not chemistry. It is not magic. It is your shadow making itself known. Sexual attraction, according to Jung, extends far beyond love or physical compatibility. It represents a psychological explosion, one that often reveals more about your wounds than your genuine wants. When you are drawn to someone so strongly that you feel powerless against the pull, that is not love taking hold. That is projection at work. Jung believed that inside every person lives an unconscious opposite. The anima resides in men and the animus in women. These inner figures are not merely abstract psychological concepts floating in theoretical space. They are emotionally charged forces that represent everything we have suppressed, denied, or never developed within ourselves. They carry the weight of our unlived lives, our rejected qualities, our forbidden desires. Here is the part that should make you pause. When you meet someone who reflects your inner anima or animus, your psyche lights up like a circuit board suddenly connected to power. It recognizes something profound. That person seems to hold everything you lack, everything you have been searching for, without knowing you are searching. So you do not actually fall in love with them as a real, complex individual. You fall in love with yourself, or rather with the part of yourself you have never consciously met. This explains why sexual attraction often feels completely irrational, beyond the reach of logic or reason. You may know intellectually that the person is unavailable, living across the country, married, manipulative, or even displaying toxic behaviors. Your friends might warn you. Your own experience might scream danger. But the pull remains stronger than any logical argument you can construct. You feel addicted to their presence, haunted by their absence, spellbound by their very existence. This happens because your unconscious has mistaken them for your missing piece, your completion. Now imagine what this means in our modern world, where seduction has become almost weaponized, where people learn through trial and error to mimic your deepest fantasies without even realizing what they are doing. Consider how some individuals instinctively learn that the way to create intense attraction is not through direct aggression or obvious tactics, but through reflection, through unconsciously becoming the projection of another person's hidden desires. If a man has never confronted his inner anima, if he has never looked honestly into the mirror of his psyche and asked why he craves what he craves, then he is not actually choosing his romantic partners. He is being chosen by his wounds, selected by his unconscious patterns. And if someone knows how to play that role, whether they do it consciously as manipulation or unconsciously as their own pattern, he will surrender completely. He will call it love, destiny, a once-in-a-lifetime connection. But it is just projection playing out its ancient dance. She is not actually the one. She is a mirror reflecting back his own unconscious material. The woman herself, with all her actual qualities and complexities, remains largely unseen. What he sees instead is his own internal drama projected onto her form. She becomes a screen onto which he projects his unlived feminine aspects, his rejected emotions, his idealized fantasies of completion. Jung said something particularly chilling about these dynamics. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed in the process. But in cases of sexual attraction, driven primarily by shadow projection, the transformation is not necessarily healthy or growth-producing. It can become obsessive, destructive, reducing a person to nothing more than their desire, stripping away their autonomy and self-awareness. This represents the darkest truth about attraction that most people never want to acknowledge. You are not always drawn to who is genuinely good for you, who would support your growth, who would create a stable and nurturing partnership. Instead, you are drawn to whoever completes your internal story, whoever fits the unconscious narrative you have been writing since childhood. And sometimes that story is not a romance. Sometimes your story is a tragedy waiting to unfold. Consider the man who never felt truly seen by his mother, who grew up with emotional distance where there should have been warmth and recognition. When he meets a woman who is emotionally cold, who withdraws love and offers it only when he pursues desperately, he feels suddenly intensely alive. Every cell in his body responds. He thinks this must be it. This must be real love because it feels so powerful. But what he is really trying to do is rewrite the past, to win a battle he lost in childhood, to finally earn the love that should have been freely given. This represents the compulsion of emotional patterns that were never healed, not necessarily from physical trauma, but from the subtle wounds of neglect, dismissal, or conditional love. The woman becomes his battlefield where he fights old wars. He tries desperately to earn what should have been his birthright. And when she denies it, withholds it, makes him work for every scrap of affection, it hurts more deeply than any stranger's rejection should. So he desires her even more intensely, mistaking pain for passion. Now consider the reverse dynamic. There are women who are not truly seeking love, but power through being desired. They do not actually want to be loved in the vulnerable, mutual way real intimacy requires. They want to be chased, worshipped, obsessed over, placed on pedestals that keep them safely above real human connection. They weaponize their sexuality, not out of conscious evil, but out of their own unhealed pain. Their shadow was never shown safe, consistent affection. Perhaps they learned early that love was dangerous, that vulnerability led to abandonment, that power came from being wanted but never fully obtained. So now their shadow seeks dominance through desire. When a man falls at her feet, she feels temporarily alive, temporarily powerful, temporarily safe. But the moment he asks for genuine emotional intimacy, for the messages of real relationship, she runs. The moment it becomes real, when genuine vulnerability enters the equation, the illusion dies. Because the illusion was never about connection. It was about control, about staying safe while appearing available. Sexual attraction in these cases is not about genuine connection. Sometimes it functions as a trap, a psychological snare, where your deepest unmet needs disguise themselves as romantic longing. Carl Jung did not present these ideas to make us afraid of desire or to pathologize normal human attraction. He offered them to make us conscious of our patterns, to help us ask the difficult questions. Who does my soul reach for when my mind is quiet? Who do I crave when I am not thinking clearly? And most importantly, why do these particular people hold such power over me? Because if you never answer these questions honestly, if you never examine the patterns underlying your attractions, you will keep choosing the same emotional dynamic over and over again. The faces will change, the names will be different, the circumstances will vary, but the core pattern remains identical. You will call it fate or bad luck, but it is actually your shadow pulling the strings from behind the curtain of consciousness. Here is a truth that few people can comfortably handle. Sometimes the person you desire most intensely is the exact person positioned to activate your deepest wounds. Not because they are evil or deliberately harmful, but because your unconscious wants desperately to recreate your original wound, hoping that this time the outcome will be different. This time you will get it right. This time you will finally heal. That is not love operating in your life. That is karma, understood not as cosmic punishment, but as repetition until you learn the lesson. This represents the essence of understanding shadow work in relationships. The darkness is not located in the other person, not in their flaws or their inability to love you properly. The darkness lives in you, in what you project onto others, what you chase after, and what you run from. Sexual attraction can indeed be sacred and beautiful, but only when you recognize the unconscious dynamics at play. Only when you ask yourself honestly whether this is love or whether you are trying to complete an unfinished story from your past. Let us examine how these patterns manifest in real life. There was a man, highly successful in his career, emotionally intelligent by most standards, respected by everyone who knew him. But every time he fell in love, it followed the same pattern. The woman would be emotionally elusive, hard to read, offering affection sporadically, like treats to a hungry animal. One woman left him for someone else after months of intense connection. Another disappeared without explanation after profound intimacy. Another mocked him cruelly when he showed emotional vulnerability. Different women, completely different backgrounds and personalities, yet the same story played out each time. Logically, consciously, he knew these women were not healthy choices for him. He even warned his friends when starting new relationships, saying things like, "She is not good for me," or "I know this will end badly." But he kept going back, kept choosing the same emotional template. Why did this pattern persist despite his awareness? Because his unconscious was not actually trying to find love in the way we typically understand it. It was trying to resolve pain, to complete an incomplete story. This man grew up with a distant, cold mother who could not show affection, who made him feel invisible no matter what achievements he brought home. So now, as an adult, his psyche constantly seeks that same feeling of emotional distance, but with the hope of finally bridging it this time. He is not really chasing these women as individuals. He is chasing his mother's ghost, trying to earn from strangers what he could never earn from her. This demonstrates how sexual attraction becomes a psychological loop that can trap us for decades. You are not addicted to the person themselves, to their unique qualities, or their individual presence. You are addicted to the wound they represent, to the hope of finally winning the old battle, finally achieving the healing you have been seeking since childhood. This is the trap Jung desperately tried to warn us about. Sexual energy represents one of the most powerful forces in the human psyche. It goes far beyond simple pleasure or reproduction. It connects to identity formation, to our sense of safety in the world, to power dynamics, to our need for validation and recognition. When that potent energy mixes with your deepest emotional pain, it becomes magnetic and explosive, but also potentially dangerous to your well-being. Consider the women who find themselves drawn again and again to emotionally unavailable men. Men who present as charming, exciting, confident, dominant, but who remain fundamentally cold, detached, often capable of casual cruelty. These women often say things like, "Why am I only attracted to men who hurt me?" or "I lose interest when a man treats me well." This is not a personality flaw or a sign of poor judgment. It represents emotional programming operating below the threshold of consciousness. Many of these women were taught, either directly through words or indirectly through experience, that love must be earned through effort, that being ignored means you need to try harder, that rejection is simply a challenge to overcome. So the moment a man shows indifference or emotional distance, the attraction spikes dramatically. The nervous system recognizes the familiar pattern and responds with intensity. Why does this happen? Because the unconscious recognizes the pattern and says, "There it is, the familiar pain I know how to navigate. Let me try to fix it this time. Let me try to finally win." And if that man, whether consciously or unconsciously, knows how to maintain that distance while offering just enough hope to keep her engaged, he becomes her obsession. But this is not love creating that intensity. This is inner chaos desperately seeking resolution. The dynamic becomes even more complex when we recognize that some individuals learn to weaponize these psychological truths. Some people realize, through experience if not through conscious understanding, that sexuality can control another person more effectively than logic or direct communication ever could. They learn that withholding emotional availability while offering intense physical or sexual connection creates a powerful hook, a trauma bond stronger than most people can break without significant effort and awareness. They learn to mirror back the fantasy, to become the projection rather than revealing their authentic self. The more their partner chases them, pursues them, tries to earn their full presence, the more powerful they feel. It becomes psychological domination, disguised as romance, control masquerading as connection. Jung would call this a projection trap. The man does not love her as she actually exists. He loves what she represents, his missing half, his unlived feminine qualities. But here is where it gets particularly disturbing. She does not love him either. She loves the control, the power dynamic, the sense of being desperately needed. She loves seeing him lose himself because it gives her back something she lost long ago, whether that is power, safety, or even a form of revenge against past wounds. This represents the darkest corner of sexual attraction. Two people are not meeting with open hearts and genuine curiosity about each other. They meet with broken mirrors, each seeing their own distortion reflected back. Where intimacy should exist, there is only performance. Where vulnerability should grow, there is only strategy. Both sides are using the other to fix something from the past, and the more intense it feels, the more dangerous it becomes. If you do not know your shadow, if you have not examined your unconscious patterns, attraction will use these blind spots to drag you into destructive patterns. The pull will feel like destiny, but it is simply repetition. Jung did not share these insights to make people fearful of relationships, or to suggest that all attraction is pathological. He shared them because real love, genuine intimacy, cannot exist without awareness of these dynamics. You have to look honestly at the people you are drawn to and ask uncomfortable questions. What do they remind me of from my past? Do I feel genuinely safe with them, or just addicted to the intensity? Am I authentically myself around them, or am I performing a version they seem to want? These questions matter because attraction is not always a sign of compatibility. Sometimes it functions as a warning, a signal that your psyche is trying to finish an old story rather than start a fresh chapter. People often wonder why they always fall for the same type, why they feel powerless against certain dynamics, why they knew someone was unhealthy for them but could not stop pursuing them. The answer is not found in logic or willpower. It lives in the unconscious patterns that operate below awareness. Jung's theory of individuation teaches that we must integrate all parts of ourselves, including the anima, the animus, and the shadow, before we can truly choose our partners consciously. Otherwise, we remain puppets dancing to unconscious strings. Desire pulls those strings, and we call it fate, or chemistry, or true love. So if you keep chasing unavailable women, or emotionally manipulative men, or chaotic relationships driven by intensity rather than stability, you have to stop and ask what part of you is choosing this. What wound is being activated? Why does dysfunction feel like home? Until you answer those questions honestly, you will keep waking up in the same emotional nightmare, just with a different face beside you each time. Because the truth is, we are not attracted to people as much as we are attracted to emotions we have never resolved. In that chaos of unexamined patterns, love becomes a battlefield where old wars are fought again and again. The unconscious mind remains constantly active, making choices for you that you do not even recognize as choices. Let me illustrate this with another real example. A woman, brilliant in her field, confident in most areas of her life, found herself repeatedly drawn to men who would shower her with intense attention initially, then gradually become cold and controlling. The pattern was so consistent, it seemed almost mathematical in its precision. First came the love-bombing phase, where these men would treat her like she was the most incredible woman who ever existed. Then came the subtle criticisms, the emotional withdrawal, the making her feel like she needed to earn back their initial warmth. Finally came the discard, where they would leave her feeling worthless and confused about what she had done wrong. Different men, different cities, different contexts, but the same emotional trajectory every time. She would tell her therapist she could see the pattern clearly, that she knew intellectually what was happening. But knowing did not stop the attraction. In fact, the men who treated her well, who were consistent and kind, felt boring to her nervous system. She described it as feeling no spark with good men, while feeling electricity with men who would inevitably hurt her. This was not about her lacking intelligence or self-awareness on a conscious level. This was about unconscious programming that ran deeper than thought. In her childhood, love had been inconsistent, conditional, something that had to be earned through perfect behavior. Her father would be warm when she achieved something, cold when she simply existed. So now her nervous system recognized inconsistent attention as love and consistent kindness as meaningless. The men she chose were not random. They were perfect matches for her wound, actors who knew their role in her psychological drama without having read the script. They could sense, perhaps unconsciously, that she would respond to that particular dynamic, that she would work harder when they pulled away, that she would blame herself for their coldness. It was a perfect traumatic fit, two pieces of dysfunction clicking together. This dynamic extends beyond individual relationships to explain broader patterns in how people navigate intimacy. The person who always becomes the rescuer, trying to save broken partners. The person who always becomes the child, seeking a parent rather than a partner. The person who always becomes the teacher, maintaining distance through superiority. These are not relationship styles. They are shadow projections, unconscious patterns seeking completion. Sexual energy, when it combines with these patterns, creates bonds that feel unbreakable even when they are obviously destructive. The body becomes addicted to the emotional chemicals these dynamics produce. The nervous system craves the familiar chaos, interpreting intensity as importance, drama as depth, pain as passion. Breaking these patterns requires more than just finding different people. It requires fundamentally rewiring how your nervous system responds to intimacy. Consider how this plays out in modern dating culture, where people have more options than ever, but report feeling less satisfied with their connections. The abundance of choice has not led to better relationships, but to more opportunities to replay unconscious patterns. People swipe through faces looking for something they cannot name, rejecting healthy options for reasons they cannot articulate, drawn to profiles that somehow signal the familiar wound. You do not attract what you want. You attract what you are, and more specifically, what you have not yet healed within yourself. If you are still carrying wounds that you have never properly addressed, they will speak louder than your conscious intentions, louder than your stated values, and louder than your logical understanding of what makes a healthy relationship. This represents the darkest truth about sexual attraction. It is not about finding the right person. It is about discovering what your unresolved pain continues to seek. Most people believe they are falling in love with someone's individual qualities. Their eyes, their voice, their intelligence, their unique energy. But what if you are really falling in love with their pattern? The behavioral pattern that mirrors your unfinished emotional story. The story where you were not chosen by someone who mattered. The story where you had to beg for attention that should have been freely given. The story where love was always just out of reach, requiring one more achievement, one more change, one more sacrifice. Jung warned that if you do not make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This applies nowhere more powerfully than in romantic relationships. Consider the man who constantly falls for emotionally intense, seductive women who ignite something primal within him. He tells himself this is chemistry, this is passion, this is what real attraction feels like. But then every single relationship ends with him feeling emotionally drained, confused, and somehow less than he was before. That is not passion operating in his life. That is possession by an unconscious pattern. he is not falling for a woman. He is falling into his shadow, into the parts of himself he has never acknowledged or integrated. Perhaps he has never felt truly powerful in life, never felt his own worth independent of external validation. Perhaps he grew up believing his value came only from being needed, from solving problems, from earning approval through service. So now he chases women who reflect back his deepest insecurity, the fear of not being enough on his own. When they validate him, he feels temporarily godlike. But when they pull away, as they inevitably do in this dynamic, he feels like nothing. That emotional roller coaster is not love. It is addiction to a familiar chemical state, a known quantity of pain mixed with occasional relief. There are women who keep falling for emotionally cold, withholding men who treat affection like a prize to be won. Every time he looks away, it feels like a challenge her nervous system recognizes. Maybe if she just proves she is good enough, attractive enough, understanding enough, he will finally choose her fully. But she was not actually drawn to him because he is exciting or mysterious. She was drawn because he reminds her of the man who never truly saw her, whether that was her father, her first love, or another formative relationship. What does her psyche do with this recognition? It tries to finish the story, to rewrite the ending. It hopes this man, this time, will give her the closure and validation that the original withholder never provided. But he will not provide it because he is not that original person. And even if he were, the past cannot be changed through repetition in the present. This is not healing taking place. It is repetition compulsion, recreating the wound again and again until you finally become conscious of the pattern. You recreate the pain repeatedly until awareness finally dawns. The moment you become truly conscious of the pattern, the spell breaks. Because most people never realize that sexual attraction can be manipulated by trauma. The more familiar a wound feels, the more intense the desire becomes. You call it a spark, but it is really a scream from your past trying to be heard. That explains why the most toxic relationships are often the hardest to leave. Not because you love the person, but because you are emotionally entangled with them. Bound by invisible strings of unhealed pain, they feel stronger than conscious choice. So what is the solution? Do we give up on love entirely? Do we fear attraction forever, viewing it as dangerous and deceptive? No, but you must stop assuming that attraction automatically means alignment with your well-being. Instead, become an investigator of your own desires. Ask yourself why you feel pulled to this specific person. What emotion do they trigger in you? Is this attraction coming from wholeness or from emptiness? Because if your desire is coming from a place of lack, from a sense that you need someone else to complete you, it will always seek to fill a hole that cannot actually be filled by another person. That hole can only be filled by you through the hard work of integration and healing. Jung believed that the path to genuine love starts with individuation, the process of integrating your shadow, acknowledging your wounds, and recognizing your projections for what they are. When you love from a place of individuation, you are not clinging desperately. You are choosing consciously. You are not seeking salvation in someone's arms. You are sharing your wholeness with another whole person. Real love begins when you stop needing someone to fix your past and start being present in the current moment. That is when sexual attraction transforms from chaos to clarity, because you are no longer chasing people who make you feel like your trauma did. Instead, you are drawn to people who reflect your healing, who match your growth, who meet you in your wholeness rather than your wounding. And here is what might feel strange about that shift. Those people, the healthy ones, they will not make your heart race in panic. They will not keep you up at night, wondering if you are enough. They will not create the dramatic highs and lows that your nervous system has learned to associate with importance. They will feel calm, grounded, maybe even a little boring at first. Your nervous system, so accustomed to the storm, might interpret peace as emptiness. But give it time. Allow yourself to adjust to a different rhythm, because peace is not boring. It is simply foreign to a system trained on chaos. Peace feels unfamiliar until you make it your new home, until your nervous system learns that safety can coexist with love. So the next time your heart races around someone, pause and ask yourself whether this is genuine excitement or fear dressed up as attraction. Because love does not always look like fireworks. Sometimes it looks like stillness, like safety, like truth. Sometimes it feels like coming home to yourself rather than losing yourself. That is the love Jung wanted us to find. Not the love shaped by fantasy or lust or trauma, but the love born from the integration of the self. Before you fall in love with them, fall in love with the parts of you that are still screaming for attention. Listen to them with compassion. Acknowledge their pain. Heal them through awareness and integration. Then choose love, not out of desperation or unconscious compulsion, but out of wholeness and conscious decision. That is how you escape the darkest truth of sexual attraction. Not by rejecting desire entirely, but by understanding its voice, recognizing its source, and choosing whether to follow its call. The work of individuation, of shadow integration, is not easy. It requires looking at parts of yourself you have spent a lifetime avoiding. It means acknowledging that some of your most intense feelings have been misdirected projections rather than genuine connections. But this work leads to something far more valuable than the intensity of projection. It leads to the capacity for real intimacy, where you see another person as they actually are, not as a screen for your unlived life.